family came to America in 1927. My father was a chazan, and he also composed music for chazanim. And he was told to come. He was very good friends with Chazan Yosler Rosenblatt, and Yosler Rosenblatt, his first job was in Munkach, where my family came from, and my father was in his choir, and that was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. And my father couldn't find work in Hungary, so Yosler Rosenblatt told him, come to America, and you can be a chazan in America. So then they were only 4 children, and my father brought the family to America in 1927. And then in 1929 was the Great Depression, and whoever didn't work on Shabbat, he didn't have a chance. My family, from 1929, they were very poor because my father wouldn't work on Shabbat, and they had nearly no income. And so I was born in 1937, and my siblings, they supported the family. And my brother-in-law, I had a sister 22 years older than me. My brother-in-law was drafted to the army, and they had a small business in the East Bronx, and my family moved to the East Bronx so that my mother could take care of their daughter. So I grew up in the East Bronx, and when I was growing up, it wasn't so unusual. But then, after World War II, all the Jews moved out, and it was really it was really an adventure to grow up in the East Bronx at that time. So I went to high school. I went to Hunter High School, and my 3 best friends were girls, non-Jewish girls. And I used to bring them home for Shabbat, and my father was very upset because my other siblings, they became irreligious. And he asked a friend of his, does your daughter, he knew that his friend had a daughter my age, and he said, does your daughter have Jewish friends? He said, yes. He said, how? And he said, she goes to Bnei Akiva. He said, tell your daughter to take my daughter to Bnei Akiva. So my friend came to take me for Shabbat to Bnei Akiva. In the beginning they looked very queer, but I got used to them, and I became very fervent Bnei Akiva. I finished with all my Gentile friends, and became part of the Zionist movement. And when I was 18, I saw that I must leave America, otherwise you get used to it. I taught myself to type. I went to work in an office, and I made contact with the Shari Tzedek Nursing School, which at that time was on Yafo, Rehov Yafo, and they accepted me. So I earned money, and I was helped by the Jewish Agency, and 2 weeks before Pesach, I got on the ship SS Israel, and I came to Israel.
What year?
56. And my sister, I had an aunt and uncle in Israel. They came to Israel in 1933. They had no children, and they were my home base. And in the fall, I joined the Shari Tzedek Nursing School. The conditions there were very, very primitive. Sometimes I felt that I had gone back 100 years. And in the 3rd year of nursing school, I met my husband, and we got married. And when I finished nursing school, I continued working as a nurse. And he continued learning in Merkaz Harav. And when I became pregnant with my 2nd child, my husband saw that he has to start making a living. And then Kibbutz Levi in the Lower Galilee, they were looking for a rabbi, and they came to my husband. And he said, we'll go live in Kibbutz Levi. And he made a deal with them that he would work half a day, and he would learn the other half, and he would be the rabbi in the kibbutz. So we moved to Kibbutz Levi in the Lower Galilee, and after about a year or two, I saw that I don't like the way of life, that the children aren't at home with the parents. So I made a deal with my husband that we'll be there 5 years, and then we'll leave. So after 5 years, people came from Moshav Nechalim, which is near Petach Tikva, looking for a rabbi, and we moved to Nechalim, and that's where the war broke out. And so, everybody made preparations for 3 months, 6 months, and suddenly after a week it was all over. And everybody was confused, and my husband said, "This is a sign from heaven. We have received biblical Israel on a silver platter. That means that we have to go settle Israel." And right away he started running around and speaking with people, trying to get people to accept his idea. And then afterwards they came to a conclusion that Pesach, they want to go to Hebron for Pesach. So they came to Hebron, they wanted to find a house to buy. And they couldn't find a house to buy. Suddenly they saw an Arab hotel. It was called Park Hotel. And my husband went into the hotel and he spoke with the Arab owner. And he said to him, "I want to rent your hotel for an indefinite amount of time, for an indefinite amount of people. How much money?" So they sat and they wrote a contract in terrible English, because my husband, he didn't know English so well, and the Arab also not. I laughed a lot when I saw that contract. And this much, then it was lira, this much lira for a room, and this much lira for a bed, and etc., etc. And they signed the contract. And then my husband came home, and he told me, "Go to the hotel and see what's doing there." So I went to the hotel, and I saw that he has a small, narrow kitchen, a big dining room with leather furniture, because the sheikhim, they would come to his hotel, because in Hebron the summer is wonderful. And they came from Saudi Arabia, they came from the Persian Gulf. In the summer they would come to his hotel. And the dining room was full of leather furniture. And I brought women with me from Moshav Nechalim, and we washed down the dining room, and my brother-in-law, who was also a rabbi, he kashered the kitchen. So half a kitchen was kushel Pesach, the Nahadrin, and half a kitchen was Arab taref. But the Chadar Ochel we washed down with chlorine, and it was kushel Mahadrin, the Pesach. And we came for that first Seder. The first Seder in Hebron was with Rabbi Druckmann, and afterwards on Chol HaMoed, my husband gave interviews to all the papers that the Jews had returned to Hebron. And in Hebron you won't have Yarashta v'gam Haratzachta v'gam Yarashta. Have you also killed and will you also inherit? Will not be in Hebron. And so we were living in the hotel for about 6 weeks. And then Moshe Dayani transferred us to the military compound. And in the military compound, every family was given a room. There were 2 rooms to every apartment, and a bathroom on the Mirpeset, on the balcony. And we had a common dining room. The dining room in Hebron, the military compound, had stables. Hussein had his horses there. So when the Jews came, they chased out the horses, and the storeroom of the stables became our kitchen and our dining room. And we lived in a commune. The women, we would cook in the morning, and the men, they had a prison there that they made a base midrash from the prison, and Shabbat they would go daven in Marat HaMachpelah. And so then the Arabs were angry, and the left was angry. There was a big hullabaloo. And Moshe Dayani also, he didn't like the ideas of Jews living in Hebron. He believed that Hebron is Arab. So he thought we would dry up and go away, but we didn't. And Benny and Bina Katzaver, they came to my husband and said they want to get married and they want to live in the military compound. So my husband said to them, live, and that she's a teacher. He said, okay, get married here. So they made the marriage ceremony in the military compound. And so there were all kinds of arguments with the army, with this, with that. Dayan, he didn't want us, no cost. And so we had a confrontation with Moshe Dayan at the time of the marriage. And he decided he wants to kick out 3 families from the military compound. And then Cherut was Cherut, and they got up on their hind legs and they said, how can Jews kick Jews out of Hebron? And if Degania would have been captured by the Jews and Jews would return to Degania, would anybody kick the Jews out of Degania? So because of this argument, you know, that Cherut, opposite Mapai, because Mapai felt threatened, so they agreed to build the community in Kiryat Arba for 240 families.
So you got Kiryat Arba.
We got to Kiryat Arba, and we were warned by, there was Uri Tzvi Greenberg. He said, they're giving you Kiryat Arba, and after a few years they're going to come and sweep you out. He warned my husband, don't leave Hebron. So, but most of the families in the military compound, they wanted to live in normal apartments because we had very severe conditions in the military compound. And so we had a vote and we lost because we wanted a vote to stay in Hebron. Because Hebron is Stei Machpelah. Hebron is the field of the Machpelah. And at some point the Arabs started making Bagatz. And then, what's Bagatz? You know, they appealed to the Supreme Court against enlarging Kiryat Arba. And the Bagatz, the Supreme Court, they froze the building. No more building. And my husband made a meeting in our house. And you have the Chabad artist, Baruch Nachshon, and he got up and he said, the reason this is happening to us is because we didn't move to Hebron, to Stei Machpelah. And now because we didn't move to Stei Machpelah, they're freezing us, and in the end we won't have not Hebron and not Kiryat Arba. You'll see.
What year would this be approximately then?
This was 1979. And so I understood. I said, he's right. We have to move back to Hebron. We have to move back to Stei Machpelah. But I said, you know, we'll go only women and children, and then maybe the army won't be so quick to kick us out. So I went around. I spoke to some of the women, you know, the old war horses who began with us in the military compound before we moved to Kiryat Arba. And we got together a group, and they said, you know, we're willing to go live in Hebron. You know, they should just find a place for us to live. So I went to my husband, and I said, Moshe, Nashim, what Baruch Nachshon said is right, that because we didn't settle from the beginning in the Stei Machpelah, now we're not going to have not Kiryat Arba and not Hebron. So I have a group of women, he knew them all, and they're willing to go settle in Hebron so that we can be able to redeem Hebron. So he looked at me and he saw that I'm serious, and he goes, I believe in women. And he left the house and he went to his friends, and they started touring Hebron, where is the most likely place to settle. And at that time, Beit Hadassah was a small building of 2 flights, and it was empty because before the Six-Day War, it was an Arab girls' school run by UNRWA. And when the army came, they kicked out all the students. It was their base in the beginning. That's where before they moved to the military compound, they worked from Beit Hadassah, and then they wouldn't let the Arabs back. And it was empty, and the Arabs vandalized the whole place, whatever could be uprooted, they uprooted, no windows, no doors, no what have you. So the men decided that we would move into Beit Hadassah because it was most convenient. So that night, they made the night, they said, Tuesday night, Wednesday night. So they said, you must, at that time I already had 10 children, you must wake up the kids at 2 o'clock in the morning, and at 3 o'clock in the morning, a truck will wait in the parking area and take everybody down to Beit Hadassah. So at 2 o'clock in the morning, I started going to all the children, tried to wake them up, and they said, Ima, I'm tired, it's cold, and none of them wanted to get up. So I remembered something that I read once by Rabbi Nachman Breslov. I'm not a chassid from Rabbi Nachman, but I read many of his books, and he said that sometimes the person has a good intention, and all these reasons arise why not to do what he really wants to do, and a person should pay attention that this is what happens.
The date you moved in?
This is when I started waking up the children in order to move in.
And it was what year, time of year?
It was a week after Pesach. It was 79.
Yeah. And it was all edited up.
Yeah, no, I'm very bad at numbers.
Yeah, so I think it was 79. 79.
It was 79, yeah. No, that's it. Malachi was 171, and this was 79. Right, sorry. And I put pajamas on limp hands and shoes on limp feet. And I went from kid to kid, and I said, Rabbi Nachman, help me. And then when I tied the last shoelace, all the kids jumped on their feet. And they said, Ima Lanosin, where are we going? And I said, I took it as a good sign. He said, Ima Lanosin. They asked, and we all went down into the parking lot, and all the families were waiting there with all their children. And the yeshiva bacharim from the yeshivat Nir, and the truck was waiting. And we all climbed on the truck, and I had a 10-month-old baby, and I lay on my back, and I put her on my chest. And the truck started moving, and the stars, they went by, and the street lights. And I had this feeling I'm jumping into outer space. And we came down to Hebron, to the street behind Beit Hadassah. And they put a ladder from the truck to the courtyard. And all the children scurried up the ladder, and I had the baby. So the guy who was on the ladder, I said, listen, catch her. And I threw him the baby. It wasn't very far. She's fine today. And so, and we all scurried into Beit Hadassah, and before I got out of the truck, my husband brought me 2 brooms. I said, what's this for? He said, you'll see. So we go into Beit Hadassah, the dirt was till our knees. So the first thing we did was we sent the schoolgirls to sweep the area, and we put down mattresses. The yeshiva always helped us. And I gave out oranges and cookies. And we put everybody to sleep. And I also lay down until it dawned. And then the kids, when it started dawning, the kids woke up and they started singing V'shavu banim levulam. And the children shall return to their borders. And so there were soldiers on the 2nd floor. We came into the bottom floor, and because like it's two streets. One street is very low, and the other street is higher. So the second story was on street level, and we were the bottom street. So suddenly they hear singing, and they come down with their big flashlights, and they see, some 30-odd children and 12 women, and they said, "How did you get here?" So the children said, "Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they brought us." So they notified the yeshiva boys. They already went back at night. They notified the commander. The commander was Fuad, Benjamin Ben Eliezer, and he suddenly comes in and he sees the whole kit and caboodle, and he goes, "You can't stay here." So we said, "Why?" He said, "Because there's cave fever here." So I said, "You're a terrible liar." I said, "Anyhow, we had fever in Gedera. We had fever in Hadera when the first pioneers, they had fever when they came to Israel. So we'll manage, like they managed." So he saw he doesn't have anybody to speak to, so he left. And they left us alone for 4 or 5 days so that we should come to our senses. And we brought, he put soldiers on the second floor, and we hooked up to the soldiers' electricity, and we brought in a little fridge and a gas plate. My daughter wrote, she was 5 years old at the time. She didn't really remember everything, but she heard me tell the story often because I tell the story often. And this is more or less when we all went to the truck. We were all women with small children, and this is more or less what it looked like. The illustrator, she wasn't there, but she had vision. She could picture it, and the way she pictured it was very accurate. This is everybody waiting on the sidewalk to get into the truck. The truck we had didn't have a roof, but this is more or less what we looked like, with all the packages and all the little children. And here is my daughter, my 2-year-old daughter. She refused to leave her carriage, so we put her in the truck with the carriage. And here I am, climbing the ladder. I threw the man who helped us up the ladder, I threw him the baby. She's fine today. And this is what Beit Hadassah looked when we moved in. It only had one story. And now, this is what it looks like now. It has 3 stories and apartments. So here, we moved into Beit Hadassah, and we put the children to sleep on mattresses. And when it started dawning, the children started singing V'shavu banim legvulam. The children shall return to their borders. And here she shows how the soldiers hear the singing, and they come into where we were, and they see suddenly 30-odd children and 12 women, and they say, "How did you get here?" So the children shouted, "Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they brought us." And here they're trying to convince us to take off, but we didn't. And this is an illustration of Beit Hadassah today. So Fuad, Alav Shalom, he left us alone for 4 or 5 days. He thought we would dry up and go away, but we didn't. And we put in a gas plate, and we put in, we hooked up to the soldiers' electricity, and we brought in a small fridge, and we put up light bulbs in the main corridor, and in the rooms, I got myself a doctorate on kerosene lamps, because in every room we put kerosene lamps, and in the bathrooms we put kerosene lamps. And so every day I would clean the lamps, and I would cut the wicks, and I would fill the kerosene. So when it started getting dark, we would put the kerosene lamps in the bathrooms and in the bedrooms, and that's what we did at night. And that's how we lived throughout the that was during the summer.
There's a story about the woman that had she gave birth, she had a breathe, and then the baby died, and she buried it into the...
No.
Can you tell that story?
We came to Beit Hadassah because Sarah Nachshon, she had a baby of 4 months old, and this was in August, and she calls me up and she says, I was the nurse, I was one of the nurses in Kiryat Arba. She said, he's not breathing. I ran to her house and I called the other nurse and the other 2 nurses, and we started doing hanshama, artificial respiration, and the ambulance, and we brought him to Yerushalayim, and to Bikur Cholim, and they worked on him for an hour, but he died. And then I was with Sarah, so we sat in the waiting room, and Sarah Nachshon, she kept saying, my angel, why did this happen? How could this happen? She said he was born in Hebron because she gave birth to him in the infirmary in Kiryat Arba, and he had his brit in Hebron at the time. They refused to allow us, so we called the Moel, and he made the bris in Marat Machpelah, and so that the soldiers shouldn't see it. So she said, look, he was born in Hebron. He had his bris in Marat Machpelah, and he died in Kiryat Arba. And she said, oh, I know why this happened, because he has to be buried in Hebron. Because until then, when somebody died, they wouldn't let us bury them in Hebron. We had to bring our dead to Yerushalayim. She said, he's going to open up the gates to Hebron. I'm going to bury him in Hebron. And then she thought, like she was having this personal conversation with God, oh God, now I know why you did this. Because you want me to open up Hebron, and we'll open it, because that's how Abraham bought Hebron. He bought a burial plot. Yeah. And she said, that's what happened with Abraham, and that's what's going to happen now. And the baby's name was Avraham Yedidyah. And she said, he's going to open the gates to Hebron. So then my husband came, and she said to him, I want to bury in Hebron. And he said to her, they won't allow us. And she said, who told you to ask? So he said, are you willing to go through this whole balagan? So she said, yes, I want him to be buried in Hebron. So we were in the hospital, and meanwhile they told the religious council, so they went to dig a grave. You don't have to tell anybody. They had this saying in Yiddish, if you ask, it's treif. So then we had a tender, a pickup truck, and I and Sarah, we sat with the driver, and the baby sat, and they put the baby in the back, covered by a sheet, and we went in the direction. And so what happened was that you have a whole procedure. So there was a police officer there. He said the mother has to go back to Hebron, to the police station there, and they have to take a record of what she says happened, because maybe it's plili, maybe it's I forget what the word is. Anyhow, so I said to him, How can you do such a thing? You want to send it to the Arab police so that they can laugh at that a Jewish child died? How can you do such a thing? So it touched him. So he took all the documents, and the court was nearby the police station. He said, Tov, he went to the court, he had the judge waiver a PM, and he came back and he said, if anybody finds out what I did today, I lose my job. And I did it because your husband is a rabbi. So I said, good for him. So, and then I had to get an agreement to bury him in Yerushalayim. So they said, you have to go to the Board of Health in Yerushalayim, but it was closed. So they said, you go to the doctor who's on call. So we went to this new neighborhood. Now it's in the middle of Yerushalayim, but then it was at the edge of Yerushalayim, a new doctor from Bulgaria. He should sign an approval of burial, that. So I went there with the driver, and he has the document in front of him, and he says to me, where do you want to bury him? So I said, should I lie? So I said to myself, try your luck. I said, we want to bury him in Hebron. So he was a new immigrant. He didn't know anything. He said, how do you spell that? So I said, Chet Bet Reish Vav. I had this feeling, I can't lie. What will be, will be. I'll tell him where I want to bury him. And he says, how do you spell that? So I saw, I'm good, I'm safe. So everything was the way it should be. And then we get to Kiryat Arba, packed with soldiers. They're opening up all the buses and all the cars. What are they looking for? A coffin. They heard that the Jews want to bury this kid in the Jewish cemetery, and they're looking for the coffin. And they said to Sarah, where's the baby? She says, if you don't let me bury my child, if you don't let us go to the cemetery, I'm going to walk with him on my hands in all of Hebron and bring him by foot to be buried in the cemetery. So they argue with her, and they said, don't you understand what you're doing? This will make a precedent. She said, really, that's exactly what I want. I want the government to open the gates of Hebron. So the officer, he saw he has nobody to speak to, and someone would tell us what they're talking about on the, how do you call it, on the
shortwave radio?
On the
walkie-talkie.
Yeah, so he said, take me off this job. I can't hear listening to the mother. It's breaking my heart. So then Shimon Peres, he was the Sar B'Tachon. He said, okay, he said, let them go to the cemetery, but tell them that it's forbidden. So they came back to tell us. So the driver goes up to the first barrier, and they say, no going. And he said, ask your officer. They asked the officer, and then they opened up the barrier. He had about 5 or 6 barriers until he reached the burial ground. And Kiryat Arba, the people were waiting there already. The grave was ready. And I'm walking with her. And we walked to the grave, and they asked my husband, where's the baby? He refused to tell them, and then he took the officer in charge, and he opened the back door of the truck, and he shows, here he is, he's lying on the floor under a sheet. So then they let us through, and when we got to the burial ground, so Sarah, she said to me, Miriam, she said, I'm so happy he's being married with all the righteous and holy people, the Jews who died in the centuries before in Hebron. He's being buried together with them. I'm very happy. And I had this feeling that the angels are running around heaven. I said to myself, this is this is not in vain. Something is going to come of this. I had this feeling. This is not in vain. So we buried the baby, and then we went back home to Kiryat Arba, and then this story of Beit Hadassah came up, and I had the feeling that what happened with that baby is a sign that what we are attempting now will succeed. Because my daughter came home at night, and I said, "Yira, tonight we're going down to Hebron, and we're going to go in Beit Hadassah." And she said, "Mama, that's a very ridiculous idea. How do you think it's going to work?" I said, "Listen, Sarah Nachshon, she put the key in the gate, and all we have to do now is push the door open." That was my feeling.
So this event happened before the Beit Hadassah?
Yeah.
So this set the stage.
This was a preliminary.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So that makes, okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that. That's...
Yeah. So I had the feeling, even at the time of the burial, I said, this is not in vain. Something is going to come of this. I had this, feeling inside. And then when we got the story of Beit Hadassah, and my daughter said to me, "Mama, this is absurd. Nothing is going to come of this." I said, "Sarah Nachshon put the key in the gate. All we have to do is push it open." That was my feeling. And this was an Av. And we moved into Beit Hadassah in a week after Pesach.
And how long were you there?
In Beit Hadassah? We moved in, that was it. It had, with various, like the first summer, we had women coming and going, but my next door neighbor, Yocheved, so she and I, we stuck it out. Many times we were only 2 women there, with some
And when
companions who would accompany us here and there.
When you were maximum, how many were there?
No, when we moved in, that was a lot of people. But gradually, people, there was like no future, so they dwindled away, and there was only me and Yocheved. And I didn't understand, because we were only 2 women, and there were soldiers. And every day in the papers, in the radios, these lawbreakers, these Hadassah women lawbreakers, and I was expecting every day that the army would come in with 4 or 5 girl soldiers. We were 2 women, pick us up and throw us out. So I couldn't understand why they are not coming to throw us out. So then one day I was walking into Beit Hadassah, they have the bridge from the road, and I looked down in the courtyard, I see 16 children playing there. Because at the time, I had 10 and she had 9. So I said, "Where are the soldiers from? Tel Aviv, from Haifa?" I see 16 children there. So it's obvious to them that there's at least 6, 7 women in there. And they don't even bother to examine. We were only 2. So when I saw that happen, I know, trust in God. What He wants, that's what's going to be. Because this is a miracle. They're not even coming to see how many women are there. If they would have known that we were only 2 women, send 5 soldiers and finish. You understand? And they never examined. And so after a month or 2, the women started coming back, those who had permits. They started coming back. So that was already 4 or 5 families, so it was, it became a bigger business. And but it was a long, hard winter. That's all.
And so it came to an end when there was terror attack. Right?
Yeah, but Hatkafal Beit Hadassah, when they attacked Beit Hadassah, the Arabs.
So can you go through that story when that happened?
So this was Lag BaOmer, Shechal b'Shabbat, Lag BaOmer. It was a Shabbos Lag BaOmer, and every Friday night. The people who came to Machpelah, so most of the young men who learned usually in Nir, and various guests, they would walk to Beit Hadassah and make us Kabbalat Shabbat. They would sing songs, and then they would sing Shalom Aleichem and Eshet Chayil, and then they would go back to Kiryat Arba. So when they came that Friday night, So there were two houses opposite Beit Hadassah, one story each, and they stood on the roof, and they had someone bringing up the rear, an Arab bringing up the rear, and suddenly, I was downstairs, suddenly I hear explosions, boom, boom, boom. So I knew that up on the second floor, they had a room where they kept the ammunition. I said, no, someone lit a cigarette and the ammunition is going off. And we all were like paralyzed. We hear boom, boom, boom. And then everything became deadly quiet. And I went outside and I started going up the steps to the first floor. And there was the bullets hit the gas balloon, but it didn't explode. And everything was full of yellow, I said, and the smell of gas, and this deadly quiet. And I had a feeling I'm in Hiroshima. And then I get up to the second story, and suddenly I saw my daughter get up from the floor, and she said, "Ima yesh ptsuim." Mama, there's wounded. And then suddenly everything started coming at once. Suddenly I see the officer yelling in the kesher, "Atkafat mechablim al Beit Hadassah, atkafat mechablim al Beit Hadassah." And there was Rabbi Liebman. I see him standing near the first door, saying Tehillim and crying, like asking God to save us. And then they started bringing in the wounded. And the men came down from Kiryat Arba, and they examined the wounded, and they brought them to the hospitals. And they brought me one boy, you know, and I knew who he was. He used to teach my son, and I saw he's not breathing well, so I turned him over. You know, like three quarters lying down, and then I saw a hole in the back of his head. You know, so I understood that we're in trouble. You know what I mean? The whole time I didn't comprehend what was happening and what happened. I couldn't comprehend it. I just, you know what I mean? I had a blank. And then they took the wounded to the Arab hospital. So the Arab doctors did. You have in Susia, you have, his name is Aaron Pniel. His lungs, his not lungs, his ma'ayim, his intestines were out. You know what I mean? And they treated him. You know, now he lives in Susia. You know, he's a grandfather already. But they didn't believe he's going to stay alive, you know what I mean? Because all his ma'ayim were. But anyhow, and I went to the military compound, and we tried to treat the wounded as well as we could, and after an hour or so, they sent the helicopter. You know, it was I wasn't in charge.
So what was the result? How many were dead and wounded?
Six boys were killed. And also one of the killed was Eliezer. He was Meir Kahana's friend. He belonged to Kach.
How many wounded?
Oh, lots. I don't know how many. My daughter had shrapnel in her neck. And my oldest daughter, she was very smart. They were coming over the bridge into Beit Hadassah, and she heard the first shot. So she lay down on the ground, and she told my other daughter, lay down on the ground. And she saved their lives because, you know what I mean, they started shooting. I said, how are you so smart? She said, I heard that when there are shots, lie down on the ground. So she lay down on the ground. And then the next day the army came and they exploded the two houses that were opposite Beit Hadassah. And they made curfew for a month. So, you know, a lot of things happened, you understand? And,
Did that?
And all the papers were full. If Mrs. Levinger wouldn't have gone to Beit Hadassah, this would not have happened. And Chaim Bar-Lev, he said, this all happened because she went to Beit Hadassah. And they were all, you know, like the good old lefty newspapers, they were all castigating me. And I said, what am I supposed to think, right? So I said to myself, "B'milchama kamo b'milchama." Eretz Yisrael nikneit b'yisurim. You buy Eretz Yisrael from suffering. That's what's written. Eretz Yisrael nikneit b'yisurim. And I said, war is this. We're at war with the Arabs. My government, my lefty government, they want to give the Machpelah to the Arabs. Whoever heard of a people who gave away the graves of their forefathers to a different people who are also their enemies? I said, they want to give away Hebron. They want to give away the Machpelah to the Arabs. I said, this is war. And I said, they have the saying in Hebrew, "B'milchama kamo b'milchama." This is a war between us and the Jews fighting for their rights and the Goyim who want to take away their rights. Because I once made an interview with an RKO over nearly 40 years ago, 35 years ago. And he said, I didn't know I was Jewish, and then I found out I'm Jewish. I became closer to the Jewish circles. He said, I'm in the media world for 30 years. He said, and you know what? In the media world, the Jews have no rights to anything, and the Jews have no rights to any place. So I said, now I know where I'm at. I don't have to listen to them.
So now the government gave approval afterwards?
They gave us Beit Hadassah. Well, during my high school years, I realized that I'm a guest in a host land, and this is not really me, and that in order to be a true Jew, I have to live in Israel, because Israel is where I belong. And we Jews are lucky because our Bible is all black on white. It's not hearsay. And the Bible, it says that the Jews belong in the land of Israel. And we always have to remember, everybody else is Johnny-come-lately. We were here first. We're here for 4,000 years already. And it's all written in the Bible that this is where we have to live. And when I came to Israel, it was very difficult, but I always had this feeling that I came back, and this is where I belong. And I wish you all the same.